Hi, I'm Terry VanderHeiden, professional photographer, and I'm going to show you how to use Photoshop. Now, even if you've never ventured into this massive program that allows you to create art and change it, but just about anything you want in your photographs, I'm going to easily step you through it and show you how to use Photoshop from the very beginning. So let's go. Now, most photographers look for the quickest ways to edit their images. They just want to move a few sliders in Lightroom and get on to the next image. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, and I sometimes need to get the image completed as quickly as possible, so I use Lightroom for my basic editing. But there are times when you want to make an image perfect. To do that, you might need to go into Photoshop and create the exact image that you want. So years ago, Adobe launched the photographer subscription plan, which allows you to use Lightroom and Photoshop for about $10 a month. Every time there's a new update, you can download it and get the new version at no extra cost. Well, I bristled at this when I first thought of paying a monthly fee to use Photoshop. The first version of Photoshop I bought was about $500 for the initial program. And at that time, I was upgrading to the newest versions about every year or year and a half. When I ran the numbers, for me to stay current, I was spending about the same amount of money per month that I would for the subscription. So it makes sense for me to subscribe to the photographer's plan and get both programs with current updates. While many photographers have this plan, only a few use Photoshop to improve their images, even though they're already paying for it and it's included in their monthly subscription. The reason many times is Photoshop is a huge, hulking beast of a program that frankly intimidates some artists. It doesn't have to be that way. We'll just take our time and I'm going to show you how to use Photoshop. Hopefully, I'll take away the intimidation and get you started on the road to learning a program that can artistically allow you to do just about anything you can imagine on your images. I've been a user of Photoshop for quite some time. In fact, I was an early adopter of photo manipulation software and worked with the very first version of Photoshop back in the 1980s. For several years, I was even a certified expert in Photoshop through the program that Adobe offered. I also have learned a lot that I'm going to share with you. Today, I use Photoshop in my professional business to create images for my clients and improve the images that I'm creating for publications. And you can do this too. To show you the basics of how to use Photoshop, it'll take several episodes to get you proficient. So take a moment, hit the subscribe button, and remember to ring that little bell to be notified of my next video, because there's going to be quite a few of these. Learning Photoshop is a little like learning a musical instrument. It'll take you a little practice. To improve quickly, take the time between the episodes to practice what you learned. Carve out some time to use the skills that you've learned. Now, if you lose track and forget some things, just go back in the archives of this series and check out the videos again. Today, we're going to work on setup, how to set up Photoshop for the very first time. All right, so we're going to start inside of Lightroom. So the reason I like to do this is because whenever you work on an image outside of Lightroom, it will just stay outside of Lightroom. But if you start in Lightroom and then go into Photoshop, it'll come back into Lightroom and save it there as a PSD file, which is a Photoshop file. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to right click on an image and we're going to go edit in and edit in Photoshop 2024. So the splash screen comes up and you're faced with this layout. An image will pop up into the screen. Let's go ahead and shrink this. You can do this by grabbing the corners with your cursor and just bring the arrows in, squish it around a little bit. So this is typically what you're going to see when you start off with an image. And in the way Photoshop defaults is they're going to give you these particular palettes. So this is called the layers palette. So the palette is where other controls reside inside of Photoshop. And then over here, if you want to click these little double arrows, you can expand one of the palettes if you like. So this is a way to kind of conserve space on your desktop. So in my case, I generally work on two monitors. So on one monitor, I have my image, and on the other monitor, I have all of my palettes open up. So it gives me just a little more real estate. But here we're going to work on a laptop, and a lot of you are working on laptops, so we're going to work in the same kind of restraints or how we work inside of Photoshop. We're going to have the ability to do that. So you can see these little double arrows will move the palettes around if we want. You can grab them and move them any place that you like. And also you can click the little double arrows and just grab it and just, push it around. You can also take a palette, you can open it up, grab this tab and grab it, send it to another palette. And now you can see that in one palette, you've got a couple of different palettes. So let's go ahead and open this one up again. And this is the navigator. So we'll separate that one out. And this is properties. So we'll go ahead and let's just bring that down here for now. So we got our properties and we got our navigator. Now, all of these palettes are going to be available under Windows. So when you click on Windows and pull down, you can have access to all of these things. You can see right now the only ones that are marked are properties, navigator, and layers. Those are the only ones that are visible. So if we wanted to, say, have color, for instance, up here, then we could add that as a palette. If you don't want a palette, you can just click the X and get rid of it. So it's under Windows here is where you can add and subtract palettes to whatever it is you're working in your workspace. So you'll notice right here we have workspace. And whatever it is that you decide to do, so we had our default, you saw the way it came up. If we want to move this around, let's say we'll just move this over here and we'll leave our layers palette here and we'll leave our properties palette right down here. So it looks like, let's see, what else do we got? Oh, we've got other palettes over here. This is channels and paths. So a lot of times paths, which we will get into at some point, I usually put those and nest them inside of the layers palette. So let's go ahead and nest that inside of there. And we'll also nest channels in there as well. So we've got layers, we've got brush settings, and we've got palettes. So now we're a little bit more organized on this workspace that we're working with. So when we come up to window, you can see that we have an opportunity for workspace up here. So this gives us it'll be all different types of workspaces, but what we're going to do is we're going to say this is a new workspace, and we're just going to type in laptop. So this is our laptop, and we'll make sure that everything is clicked. We want this to all be saved in the same spots. So now watch what happens. When we come in here, if we decide to change our workspace around, and let's say, for instance, we will take brush settings out of there, and we'll put that over here. And let's say we're going to take eliminate properties, and then we'll go up to Windows, and we're going to add actions, and we'll put that somewhere over here. And history, we'll just eliminate history for now. Make it small. So we've changed a lot of the things here on our workspace. So if we want to get back to where we were, we go up to Window, and we go to Workspace, and we look down for Laptop. So let's go ahead and go to Laptop. We'll reset Laptop rather, and it goes back to exactly the way we had set it up. So this allows you to be creative and change your workspace if you like, but you don't have to save it that way until you're really happy with it and the way you want everything to be done. So that's your workspace that you're going to be working in inside here inside of Photoshop. So there's a couple of little small things that we want to set up before we start. And the first thing is we'll go into settings and we'll go to general. And here is all of our settings as we go through. So we've got general, we've got interface, and these are all defaults. This is all the way the defaults are when you open up Photoshop. So we're just going to leave it this way for now. We may change it as we go, but for right now, this is just all the defaults, file handling, how images are created, if we're going to export images, if they're exported to JPEG. We'll show you all that down the road. That's all a lot longer. So under performance, we have the ability to tell Photoshop how much RAM we want to use. So for instance, right here, I've got this set at about 70%. And you can tell Photoshop, oh, just use a little bit of RAM, and that's going to take you a lot longer. Or you can say, I want to maximize the RAM that's inside of this computer and let Photoshop work with it. So depending on what it is you're doing, and RAM is going to be affected by how many different programs you have open at the same time. And obviously in this case, we have Lightroom and Photoshop open. So I leave this at about 70%, but you can alter that depending on how much RAM you have to work with. Image processing, scratch disk. Now scratch disk, if you have an additional drive that's hooked up in a fast way, like a USB-C or a Fire cable, that might be something where you want to make that your scratch disk, because right now we have the hard drive, the original hard drive inside of this laptop as our scratch disk. And what a scratch disk does is this acts as kind of additional RAM to hold your image and make sure that you have plenty of information that can be transferred. So when you make a move or you make a change on an image, it doesn't take a lot of time. You're going to run it to the scratch disk, and it's a temporary file that'll sit on your scratch disk and allow you to be faster. So if you don't have a ton of RAM, this is something where you may want to assign a nice fast hard drive to be your scratch disk. Now, cursors is one other thing that I change. A lot of times it arrives here as standard. And let me show you this here. We'll go out of this for now. So this is the toolbox here, and this is where you have your tools. You have the ability to show it as 4 in a row, or you can do them as a column. I leave mine as a column because I really like this valuable workspace, but you can do whatever is most convenient for you. And a lot of these have a little triangle. When you click on the triangle, it a lot of times will expose other possibilities of that tool. So this is the lasso tool. And then you can have the polygonal lasso or the magnetic lasso. So you have these different options. And when you look over here, you've got shortcuts. So the letter L will get you into that tool. So this is something you're going to want to keep track of as you go. Learn some shortcuts because it'll make your process a lot faster in working in Photoshop. So these are our tools that we're going to work with. And as we go into our tools, let's go ahead and take this eyedropper tool. And you can see that it gives us an eyedropper. And the idea of an eyedropper, we'll go ahead and zoom this up real quick. So on the navigator, you can see this red box that's around the image. And as we slide this over, you can see how it gets a little closer and closer. So the other way to move around on an image is you hold your space bar down, turns into a little hand, and then you can click and move your image around. So the ways you get around is to zoom in and out down here. You can just do it by clicks. By clicking on the larger mountains, it'll go up in levels. You can see right here, this is 67%. And now we're at 100%. And then moving around is with your hand by pressing the space bar, and a little hand comes up and you can move the image around. So back to our tool. Our tool here is the eyedropper tool, and this is for actually just selecting different colors if we want. You'll see down here in our color palette box, our original box that we're working in, here's the default. It's going to be black and white. But if we wanted to click on a color, let's say the yellow of the top of this bird's head, we click on it and that'll grab that actual color. So in case you wanted to put that color in somewhere else, and we will do that at some point, but not today. So this is the eyedropper tool. So you can see that it's got a big eyedropper. Now, if we go to, say, the brush tool, we can see that we have a nice little brush. So this is a reminder to remind you what tool it is that you have. Now, once you get used to this in Photoshop, you don't need these little icon drawings of whatever tool you have because you're going to be familiar with what tool you're working with. So if we go back into our settings and we go to our cursors, we have the ability to take off standard, which shows you the icon and just gives you the very precise point of where we're actually doing this. The other thing that you can do is you can go to normal brush tip. Now watch the difference here. Let's go back to standard and we'll click OK. Let's go into our brush tool. And let's say we want to brush with black, just as a simple, we're going to brush right over this image. And you can see, okay, our opacity was down, so let's go ahead and bring that up. And then we're going to paint with that. But we don't really know how big our brush is, right? Now we can make our brush bigger really simply. We can come up here and change the size of our brush But what does that mean to us here, right? It doesn't mean anything to us. So when we go into settings, let's check this out. We go into settings and we go over to cursors. And now instead of standard, we're going to do normal brush tip. Let's take a look at that and see how that works. Now, as we make this bigger or smaller, we can see how big our brush is going to be. So now we know how big the brush is going to be. If we want a smaller brush, we can just make it a smaller brush and we can see exactly what it is that we're doing. So this is a pretty cool thing. When we go into settings, we're going to go to our cursors and make sure that we have normal brush tip. If we wanted full-size brush tip, let's go ahead and click on that, and we can see as we also can make our different sizes. But look, see how that the brush is bigger than the image because we have other settings in place, and we don't want to work with that for right now. So in here, settings, cursors, and we're going to go to normal brush tip. So that'll give us an idea of what the size of the brush that we're working with when we're working in Photoshop and we're working with brushes. All right, let's move on. So we could cancel this out. Rather, we could remove this image completely and then reopen it. Or we can go up here to File and just go to Revert. And Revert will say, okay, let's get rid of all that junk that this guy just did. And we're back to the original picture. So that's a pretty simple way to work. So again, here's our tools. We'll go over these tools one by one as we go through this process of learning Photoshop. And it's really important to understand these tools. But for today, as we start off with this program, we're just kind of get an idea of how everything lays out in here. So the first thing you're going to want to know, let's say we're in brushes. Up here is what's called our options bar. So every tool that you work with will have options to work with. They change at the top, right? So on the brush, for instance, you have the ability to what type of brush. You have the ability to create the size of brush. You have the ability to create a mode in the brush. That's a whole big another thing that we'll get into. We have the opacity of the brush, which of course is we can paint in black, or if we change our opacity down to 33% when we paint, it just paints in gray, right? It's a 33% of black. So that's the opacity of a brush. And this is going to be real critical as we go along to know when we're going to be changing the opacity. And that's actually one of the beauties of Photoshop is you have the ability to work with the opacity on each brush, each move, a lot more detail than you can say in Lightroom. Flow is also another thing. You can change the flow of something and it will be how much ink is actually placed on the canvas at the same time. So let's go ahead and run that back to 100. Let's run that back to 100. So on our brushes, as we paint, this is a nice soft brush, but if we wanted to change how that brush looked, we can change the hardness. So let's go ahead and bring the hardness up to 100%, and you can see that same move is a much sharper type of a brush move, all right? So if we wanted to do something in smoothing, and I'll show you how this works. Let's undo all this stuff. With no smoothing on, we're just going to do a line. Okay, so not a great line, but it's a little squiggly. If we come in here and we take our smoothing and move that up, now watch what happens. It says, oh, you want a nice smooth line. So no matter how janky my drawing is, I can still make a smooth line. So it takes a little more time and a little more processing power, but it is a way that you can make smoother lines when you're working. So this is typically going to be interesting to artists who are actually just painting inside of Photoshop, but we can also use it as photographers as well. But for right now, we're going to go ahead and lower that. Now you see, anytime you want to lower a number inside of the options bar, you have a couple of choices. So like for instance, on opacity, you can pull down and you have this little slider tool, or you can simply click on the word, turns into a little hand and go left to right. So left or right, depending on how you want to change the opacity or whatever subject you're going to change. I generally have gotten used to using just clicking on the word and moving it, but because this takes just another step to come down and move it. You can also come in here and of course type in whatever it is that you wanted, click enter, and that'll give you the exact thing that you're looking for. Okay, so this is pretty simple basic brushing. We're going to bring this back to a soft brush. So we've gone through a couple of tools. We've gone through what the brush tool does. Let's go ahead and revert this one more time. Revert this back to our original. And then, of course, over here, this is our layers palette. And the very first thing I'll tell you about layers that makes Photoshop really, really fun to work with is in layers, we have the ability to just create layers on top of layers that affect all the layers below. And this I like the best, and you'll find you'll like it too. It's a little intimidating at first, and we'll just touch on it today. But what happens is when we add a new layer, whatever we want to do, if we want to do some painting on that layer, for instance. So you see here, we're painting at opacity of 71%. Let's move that up, and we'll paint that in black. And we still have our smoothing set up, so let's go ahead and take that off. So now it's a little faster, a little more responsive, but not as smooth of a line. And all of this, if you can see here, all of it has been drawn right onto this layer. So these are little eyeballs that turn layers off and on. So down here, if we turn this layer off, you can see exactly what it is we did on this layer that's still visible. So what's nice about this is once we do, let me show you how this works. Let's go ahead and get rid of this layer. We'll just hit the delete key and get rid of that layer, add a new layer. And we're going to take our black and we'll zoom up a little bit more. Get our little hit the space bar and then move this so we can see it. Then what we're going to do is we're going to take a little smaller brush. So we're going to use our bracket keys. Our right bracket makes it bigger, left bracket makes it smaller. And let's say we're just going to paint right around this part of his eye. And we'll paint up here as well. So we have painted this onto this layer. And of course, this does look a little bit lame. But if we wanted to, we can take this layer and change the opacity. Just like opacity up here on our options, we have opacity and a lot of different functions to our layers as well. So let's grab this and we'll do the pull down just so you can see it a little bit better. And let's back this off. And now you can see that what we've done is we've just darkened that area around the eye. You can't tell that it was a brush stroke. So let's turn this off and on. And that just, it's almost like dodging and burning. You're darkening an area inside of a photograph. So because of the ability that we have in Photoshop to change the opacity of each layer that we work on and how quickly we can do it, this is a simple way to really, really improve our images by going through and changing, putting everything we want to do, any of our retouching, on a separate layer. And if we want to go back to our original layer, we just turn off everything else and we can see what we originally started with. In today's episode, I just wanted to show you how you set up Photoshop, how you set up your workspace, a little touch on some of the tools. In the next episode, we're going to go through all of these tools so we understand what they do, and we'll get into that. If you have questions, feel free to leave them in the comments section, as I'll get back to you as soon as I can. You can always also reach me at terry@imagelight.com for an email if you'd rather contact me that way. Until next time, this is Terry VanderHeiden.